She attacked me. My brother's voice cracked through the living room like a gunshot, echoing off the high ceilings and the expensive portraits on the walls. He staggered backward dramatically, clutching his jaw with both hands as if I had landed a professional knockout punch. I was still frozen in place, my hands down by my sides, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard it hurt. The air in the room felt thick and suffocating as the silence stretched for a heartbeat. My father stood up so fast his heavy oak chair fell over with a dull thud against the carpet. My mother gasped, a sharp, ragged sound, like she had just witnessed something monstrous and unforgivable. I looked at Marcus, and for a split second, our eyes met. He wasn't in pain, he was calculating. He looked up at my parents, his eyes becoming glossy and filled with fake tears. He looked victorious. And that's when my father pointed a trembling finger at the front door. "Get out," he said. It wasn't a question or a request. It was a cold, final declaration that shattered my world. I tried to speak, to explain that I hadn't even touched him, but no one let me. I stood outside on the dark driveway with my small overnight bag, the cold night air biting through my thin sweater. Through the open living room window, I could hear my mother's voice, soft and cooing, as she comforted him. "It's okay, sweetheart. We know how she gets," she whispered. I flinched at those words. How do I get? I replayed the last 5 minutes over and over in my head, trying to find a version of reality where I was the aggressor. I remembered the shove he gave me when our parents weren't looking. I remembered the cold, sharp whisper in my ear just seconds before his performance. "Do it. Prove you're crazy," he had hissed. He wanted me to react, to swing, to scream, to finally lose my cool after years of being pushed into a corner. And in a way, I did react by yelling at him to leave me alone. But I never hit him. He had orchestrated the entire scene, and I had walked right into the trap. But here's what he didn't expect. There was another camera angle in that house. He just didn't know it yet, and neither did I until my phone vibrated in my pocket. Marcus had always been untouchable in our family, the golden boy who could do no wrong. He was the honor roll student, the varsity captain, the future business prodigy that my father bragged about at every single country club dinner. And then there was me. In their eyes, I was the emotional child, the dramatic one, or the one who was always too sensitive for the real world. Because of those labels, the playing field was never level. When Marcus cried, they believed his pain was deep and justified. When I cried, they simply sighed and walked out of the room, tired of my scenes. So when he fell to the floor claiming I had assaulted him, the narrative was already written before I could even open my mouth. I was the villain, and he was the victim. But this time, Marcus went too far with his greed for my destruction. Later that night, as I sat in my car in a grocery store parking lot, my mother texted me 5 words that changed the stakes of this game forever. "He's filing a police report." My own brother was trying to put me in jail. Charges. He wasn't just looking for an apology or a way to get me kicked out of the house for a few days. He wanted a criminal record attached to my name. It wasn't "let's talk," or "we need to hear the truth." It was a full legal assault. My hands shook as I stared at the screen, the blue light of the phone reflecting in my tear-filled eyes. I called him immediately, not caring that it was late. He picked up on the 3rd ring, his voice sounding perfectly normal, devoid of any of the trauma he had displayed an hour earlier. "You really doing this?" I asked, my voice trembling with a mix of rage and fear. He laughed, a low, chilling sound that made my skin crawl. "You finally snapped, sis. I just gave you a stage to perform on," he mocked. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my heart. Then I said the one word that made his laughter die instantly. "Footage." There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. "There is no footage," he snapped back, his voice suddenly sharp and defensive. He hung up before I could reply, but he said it too fast. The next morning, I went back to the house to collect the rest of my things, my heart pounding in my ears. I walked into the living room, and the first thing I noticed was the empty space on the wall where the security camera used to sit. It had been completely removed, leaving only a small, dark hole in the plaster. "That thing's been broken for weeks," my father said, appearing in the doorway with his arms crossed over his chest. He wouldn't even look me in the eye. I knew he was lying. I clearly remembered seeing the small, blinking red light on that camera during the argument. Marcus was leaning against the staircase railing behind my father, watching me panic as I realized my primary evidence was gone. He was smiling, a tiny, cruel twist of his lips that only I could see. He thought he had scrubbed the scene clean. He thought he had deleted my only hope of proving my innocence. But in his arrogance, he forgot about the high-end backyard camera my father had installed last summer. It was positioned at an angle that looked through the glass patio doors, and it saw everything. At a tense family meeting called by my aunt later that afternoon, the atmosphere was like a funeral. Everyone sat in a circle, looking at me with pity or disgust. My cousin Leo, who had always been a tech geek, pulled me aside into the kitchen under the guise of getting water. "They didn't check the exterior feed," he whispered, his eyes darting toward the hallway to make sure we weren't being watched. My stomach dropped as I realized what he was saying. "The cloud autosaves every motion-activated clip for 30 days, he continued, his voice barely audible over the hum of the refrigerator. I felt a sudden surge of hope that almost made me dizzy. Marcus walked past the kitchen doorway right then, stopping for a second to glare at us. He sensed the shift in the energy. For the first time since this nightmare started, I saw a flicker of genuine uncertainty pass over his face. He didn't know about the cloud backup, and he certainly didn't know that Leo had the login credentials. We just had to get to a computer without anyone noticing that the emotional girl was actually planning a counterstrike. Before I could even get to Leo's house to retrieve the files, Marcus went completely nuclear. He didn't wait for the police. He went to the court of public opinion. He posted a long, heartfelt status online about toxic family members, and how abuse doesn't always come from strangers. He didn't name me directly, but everyone knew who he was talking about. Within hours, my social media was a war zone. Longtime friends started unfollowing me without asking for my side. Distant relatives who I hadn't spoken to in years were texting my parents, offering their deepest sympathies for having to deal with such a difficult daughter. He wasn't just defending his lie. He was actively building a permanent case against my character. He was winning, and the weight of the collective judgment was starting to crush me. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of lies, watching my entire reputation vanish before my eyes. He was the golden boy, and I was the monster. But the tide was about to turn, because Leo and I were finally logging into the security cloud. We sat in Leo's dark bedroom, the glow of the monitor illuminating our determined faces. We logged into the storage account, my fingers trembling as I typed the password Leo had found in an old notebook. My heart was racing so fast I could hear it in my ears. There it was, a list of files from the previous night, all time-stamped and neatly organized. We found the one from the exact time of the attack. It was clear as day, captured in high definition. We downloaded the file to the desktop and held our breath. I clicked play, praying that this would be the end of the nightmare. The video started, showing the living room through the glass doors. I saw myself standing there, looking tired but calm. I saw Marcus enter the frame, his body language aggressive. But then, the video suddenly froze. A spinning wheel appeared on the screen, followed by a bright red error message. File corrupted. My heart sank into my stomach. Marcus had accessed the system first from his phone and tried to wipe it. I realized then that he had planned this entire sabotage from the very beginning. I sat back in the chair, staring at the frozen screen in total despair. But as I sat there, I started thinking about our childhood, connecting the dots that I had ignored for years. I started digging into old family incidents that had been buried. I remembered the time in high school when Marcus claimed he'd got jumped by a rival team. Yet there were never any witnesses and his injuries looked oddly superficial. I remembered the time $500 disappeared from my mom's purse and somehow, through his investigation, it was found in my sock drawer. Every single situation for the last decade had ended the exact same way. Marcus crying or playing the victim, and me being the one blamed, grounded, or shamed. This wasn't just a one-time lie to get me out of the house. It was a calculated system he had perfected over 18 years. He used my parents' love for him as a weapon to isolate me. I wasn't just fighting a false police report. I was fighting a lifetime of manipulation. I was done playing defense and being the family scapegoat. I spent the rest of the night tossing and turning on Leo's guest sofa, unable to close my eyes without seeing the corrupted error message. I felt like I had lost my only shot at freedom. But then, at 12:43 a.m., my phone rang, startling me out of my dark thoughts. It was Leo. "There's a backup server," he shouted into the phone, his voice buzzing with excitement. He explained that because my father had opted for the premium security package, the system automatically uploaded a secondary, low-resolution copy to a mirror server in case of a hardware failure or manual deletion. Marcus had deleted the main high-def file, but he didn't know about the secondary ghost file that was stored under a different directory. It was a failsafe meant for insurance purposes, and it was untouched by his sabotage. Clouds don't lie, and they don't easily let go of the truth if you know where to look. I grabbed my keys and drove back to Leo's house in the middle of the night, the empty streets blurred by my tears of relief. We logged in for the second time, our eyes glued to the screen. This time, the file opened perfectly. It was a slightly grainier angle, but it was more than enough to see the truth. The audio was surprisingly clear, picking up the sounds through the cracked patio door. We watched Marcus stepping into my personal space, his face contorted in a way my parents never saw. We heard him whisper those chilling words. "You'll always be second. They'll never love you like they love me." Then, the footage showed him shoving me first, hard enough to make me stumble. He baited me, waiting for me to swing back, but I stayed still. When he realized I wasn't going to hit him, he took a breath and slammed himself into the wall with incredible force. He let out a blood-curdling scream that didn't match the reality of the room. I watched myself standing there in total shock as he slid to the floor, clutching his face. I didn't feel rage watching it. I felt a strange, cold calm. Because now, finally, I had the power. Leo wanted me to post the video immediately and tag everyone we knew, but I stopped him. I knew how Marcus operated, and if I released it now, he would find a way to spin it or claim it was an AI-generated deepfake. I needed him to commit fully to his lie in a way he couldn't take back. So, I practiced strategic silence. I didn't reply to the hateful comments online. I didn't call my parents to beg for mercy. I let him push forward with his plan. Over the next few days, he officially filed the police complaint. He even submitted a request for a temporary restraining order, claiming he was afraid for his life. In every photo he posted, he looked confident and smug, surrounded by the protection of our misguided parents. He thought he had won the ultimate victory over me. I wanted him to be as comfortable and arrogant as possible. I wanted him to climb to the very top of his mountain of lies, because the fall hits much harder when you're at the peak. I was just waiting for the right stage. 2 weeks later, it was finally the day of the hearing for the restraining order. The courtroom felt cold and sterile, smelling of old paper and floor wax. My parents sat directly behind Marcus on the left side of the room, their faces set in grim masks of disappointment. My mother wouldn't even glance toward my side of the aisle. No one sat behind me except for Leo, who was holding a laptop bag tightly in his lap. Marcus sat at the petitioner's table, wearing a suit that made him look like the perfect, aggrieved son. He avoided eye contact with me, instead staring at the judge with an expression of practiced humility. He gave his testimony first, his voice cracking at all the right moments as he described my unprovoked violence. He painted a picture of a sister who had finally lost her mind. The judge listened intently, taking notes, until she finally looked up and asked the standard question. "Is there any video evidence of this incident?" Marcus opened his mouth to say no, but Leo stood up before he could speak. "There is, Your Honor." The courtroom went silent as the bailiff helped Leo connect the laptop to the large display screens on the wall. I looked at Marcus. The color was slowly draining from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost in an expensive suit. The screen flickered on, and the grainy footage from the backyard camera began to play. Marcus's voice echoed through the quiet room, sounding hollow and cruel. "Do it. Prove you're crazy." I heard several gasps from the gallery, including a sharp, choked-out sob from my mother. The video showed his shove, clear as day. It showed him intentionally slamming his own body into the wall. It showed his fake collision and the theatrical scream that followed. The judge held up a hand, pausing the footage right on the moment Marcus looked at the camera with a smirk before our parents ran into the room. The judge adjusted her glasses and looked directly at Marcus, her expression hardening into something terrifying. "Mr. Marcus, would you like to revise your statement before I consider perjury charges?" she asked. Marcus stopped breathing. Marcus tried to speak, but his voice was gone. He stuttered for a few seconds, his hands shaking visibly on the table. It's out of context," he finally managed to squeak out, but even he knew how pathetic it sounded. The judge didn't even blink. She dismissed the restraining order request immediately, her gavel hitting the wood with a finality that felt like a physical weight lifting off my chest. She issued a stern warning to Marcus about the consequences of filing false police reports and suggested that the district attorney might be interested in the footage. But the legal dismissal was only the beginning of his nightmare. The real punishment was waiting outside that courtroom doors. Because as the video had played, I noticed several people in the gallery had their phones out. My cousin hadn't just brought the video for the judge. He had made sure the right people were in the room to witness the truth. Marcus's golden image hadn't just cracked, it had shattered into a million sharp pieces. He walked out of the room a disgraced liar, and I walked out free. By nightfall, the footage was everywhere. It had migrated from the courtroom observers to the local community groups, and then it went viral on social media. It was in every family group chat, every neighborhood thread, and every private message in our town. The headline wasn't about a sister attacking a brother. It was about the golden boy who faked an assault to ruin his sister's life. The consequences were swift and brutal. His prestigious scholarship advisor called him in for an emergency meeting the next morning. His summer internship at a top law firm was rescinded within hours. People he had known for years were posting their own stories of how he had manipulated them in the past. The golden image was gone, replaced by the reality of a desperate, cruel manipulator. And suddenly, after days of silence and exile, my parents were standing at the door of the small apartment I had rented. They didn't look like the powerful, judging people who had kicked me out. They looked broken. My mother was crying, her face blotchy and red. My father looked smaller and older than I'd ever seen him. His shoulders slumped as if the weight of the truth was too much to carry. "We didn't know," he said, his voice barely a whisper as he stood on my doorstep. I looked at him, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to comfort him. "That's not true," I replied, my voice steady and cold. "You didn't want to know. You chose the version of reality that was easier for you to live with." They stood there in silence, unable to argue with the truth. But then, as we sat in my small living room, Leo arrived and told me something that changed the entire context of my childhood. He had been talking to some of the older relatives who had seen the video. It turned out this wasn't the first time a cover-up had happened in our family. There had been a long history of Marcus's lies that I was never told about. As the night went on, the stories started coming out. There had been other lies, other staged scenes, and even a few quiet settlements my parents had paid out to keep Marcus's reputation clean. There was a girl in middle school he had accused of bullying him to get her suspended, and a teacher whose career he had almost ruined because of a bad grade. My parents had always stepped in to fix it. They had cleaned up every mess he made because protecting the family's image was more important than the truth. They weren't just fooled by him. They were complicit in creating the monster he had become. They had sacrificed my mental health and my safety on the altar of his potential. Realizing this was more painful than the initial accusation. They hadn't just made a mistake on the night of the New Year's dinner. They had spent 18 years systematically gaslighting me to protect their favorite child. I realized that they weren't the victims of Marcus. I was the victim of all three of them. A few days later, they tried to bridge the gap. They asked me to move back home, offering to renovate the guest wing for me. "Let's just move forward as a family," my mother pleaded during a phone call. I knew what that was a translation for. "Let's bury this and pretend it never happened so we can go back to our comfortable lives." But I couldn't go back. Marcus still hadn't apologized to me. He hadn't reached out to take accountability. In fact, he had only sent me one single message through an encrypted app. "You didn't have to ruin my life over one little mistake," it read. He still saw himself as the victim of my betrayal. He didn't see the years of pain he had caused me. He only saw the loss of his own status. My parents wanted peace, but I wanted justice, and those two things were no longer compatible in that house. I realized that home was just a place where I was trained to be a secondary character in someone else's play. We met one last time in a very public coffee shop. I insisted on a neutral location because I didn't trust him not to stage another scene. Marcus didn't look angry when I walked in. He looked exposed and hollow, like a puppet whose strings had been cut. He sat there staring at his coffee, refusing to look at the people whispering at the next table. "Why?" I asked, sitting across from him. I genuinely wanted to know what went through his mind when he decided to call the police on his own sister. He finally looked up, and his expression was chillingly blank. He shrugged his shoulders as if we were talking about the weather. "Because it always works," he said simply. He wasn't even sorry. He was just surprised that it had finally failed. He had been rewarded for his lies for so long that he truly believed he was entitled to win every time. He used his charm as a weapon until the world finally developed a shield against it. I realized then that he would never change. The fallout didn't stop with the social drama. A week after our meeting, my father called me again, his voice sounding utterly defeated. It turned out that once the investigators started looking into Marcus's claims, they found other discrepancies in his life. He had falsified signatures on documents connected to a joint investment account my parents had set up for us. It was a relatively small amount of money, but it was a massive legal breach. He had been skimming off the top to fund a lifestyle our parents didn't know about. This time, there were no quiet settlements. The bank was involved, and the paper trail was undeniable. No one stepped in to fix it this time. My father couldn't protect him from the financial authorities without risking his own career. The pattern of the Golden Boy was finally being dismantled by the very system he thought he could control. For the first time, Marcus was facing the real, unvarnished consequences of his own actions without a safety net to catch him. As the weeks turned into months, the family dynamic shifted permanently. Relatives who had ignored me for years started reaching out with awkward apologies. "I'm so sorry I jumped to conclusions," my aunt wrote in a long email. "I should have asked more questions before taking sides." For the first time in my life, I wasn't the dramatic one or the sensitive one. I was the survivor of a massive gaslighting campaign. But even though I was being vindicated, something inside me had shifted in a way that couldn't be repaired. The apologies felt hollow because they only came after the proof was undeniable. They didn't love the truth. They just feared being on the wrong side of it. I realized that my value in this family was tied to what could be proven on a screen, not who I actually was. I was glad to have my name cleared, but I was done seeking their approval. I was finally standing on my own 2 feet, and the view was much clearer from here. Winning this war didn't feel loud or explosive like I thought it would. It didn't feel like a movie where I stood on a stage and gave a grand speech. Instead, it felt quiet and grounded. It felt like waking up from a long, feverish dream and realizing the room was finally still. I didn't need to pursue active revenge or post more videos to hurt Marcus. The truth was doing all the heavy lifting for me. His life continued to unravel as his past caught up to him, and I didn't have to lift a finger to help it along. I spent my time focusing on my own life, building a career and a circle of friends who didn't need a security camera to believe I was a good person. I learned that the most powerful thing you can have is a reality that you don't have to defend every single day. I was no longer a character in Marcus's drama. I was the author of my own story, and for the first time, the plot was peaceful. Marcus tried one last, desperate attempt to regain his standing. He posted a vague, carefully worded statement about a mental health crisis and undiagnosed struggles that supposedly caused his behavior. It was a classic pivot to gain sympathy, a final roll of the dice to see if he could turn himself back into the victim. In the past, this would have worked perfectly. My mother would have rushed to his side with soup and a checkbook. But this time, people in the comments were different. They weren't offering prayers. They were asking for proof. They were asking why his mental health only seemed to suffer when he was caught lying. The community had been burned too many times by his performances. Silence was the only answer he could give because he had no evidence to back up his new narrative. The world had finally stopped being his audience. He was just a guy in a room with a laptop, realizing that his words no longer carried the weight of gold. I never moved back into my parents' house, and I never restored the old, toxic dynamic. I kept them at a polite distance, seeing them only on holidays and keeping the conversations surface level. I realized that the real victory wasn't the moment the judge watched the video or the moment Marcus lost his scholarship. The real victory was the moment I realized I never actually needed their validation to be whole. The security footage didn't just play in a courtroom. It rewrote the entire narrative of my life. It stripped away the lies that had been fed to me since I was a child. It showed me that I wasn't the problem. I was just the only one who refused to look away from the truth. For the first time in my life, I wasn't second place. I wasn't the shadow. I was a person who stood her ground and won her freedom. The cameras were off now, but it didn't matter. I knew who I was, and I was finally free.